Welcome, explorers, to the fascinating world of biblical archaeology. But what exactly is biblical archaeology? Let's find out. Biblical archaeology is the study of ancient artifacts and sites to better understand the world of the Bible. Unlike paleontology, which focuses on extinct prehistoric animals, or ordinary archaeology, which explores lost items and artifacts from an ancient civilization, biblical archaeology specifically aims to uncover the historical and cultural context of the Old and New Testament. Archaeology has a rich and fascinating history filled with quirky characters and shocking discoveries. One of the earliest archaeologists was Jean-François Champollion, a French scholar from the early 19th century who is known primarily for deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. That means he had to figure out what the pictures meant in the Egyptian language. His work laid the foundation for the field of Egyptology. Edward Robinson, an American biblical scholar from the early 19th century, made a couple of groundbreaking contributions. He wrote a book called Biblical Researches in Palestine, which was the first major work on biblical archaeology. Sir Flinders Petrie, often called the father of modern archaeology, revolutionized the field in the late 19th and early 20th centuries with his meticulous excavation techniques. That means he was super careful while he dug up the cool things he found. If you've ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you've heard of the important work of William F. Albright. He checked out the Dead Sea Scrolls and was able to prove that they were the real deal. In the field of biblical archaeology, Seventh-day Adventist archaeologists have also made important contributions. Dr. Siegfried H. Horn pioneered awareness amongst Adventists on the use of archaeology not only to prove the Bible, but as a scientific discipline. Currently, there are several active archaeological sites led by Seventh-day Adventist scholars and archaeologists in the Middle East. These early pioneers we just mentioned laid the groundwork for modern archaeology. Their contributions continue to inspire new generations of archaeologists as they uncover and interpret the remnants of ancient civilizations. How do archaeologists uncover these ancient treasures? Well, before they can dig down, it all begins with piling up, like sweet layers on a cake.
A high cake, a light cake, a better tasting cake.
Let's say we hopped in a time machine and went back thousands of years to a random spot in Europe where a hunter-gatherer made a fire. Fast forward several hundred years, and the spot is now a small settlement where women work on spinning wool from their sheep and weaving it into cloth. As time continues to pass, do you see how a little bit is left from each period? Let's say there's a war and several soldiers are quickly buried on the battlefield. And then a king decides to build a castle, but enemies burn it down. And then a flood washes over the area, covering everything in a layer of mud. As the layers of soil and debris accumulate over time, we are seeing the process of stratification, with each layer or strata representing a different period. It's kind of like a huge cake made up of a lot of different layers. If you were able to cut a slice out of that cake, you would be able to see how the different materials that make up the layers of the cake all stack up on top of each other. And like a cake, the layers of history often form mounds known as tells and kerbets. These words are Hebrew and Arabic for mound and ruin, and they describe the raised features from the times people lived there and left over and over again for hundreds of years. You might be thinking these layers sound kind of like the geologic column, but it's not quite the same. The geologic column is made up of layers of rock, but the layers of a tell are made in dirt by human activity over time. When the archaeologists find a specific tell, they dig through the layers of stratification, carefully recording each item they find. And the study of these layers, known as stratigraphy, helps archaeologists understand the context of each artifact. For example, if you were to dig in our imaginary tell, you might find modern items near the surface and artifacts from the Roman Empire or even earlier periods as you go deeper. Digs happen at archaeological sites, places where evidence of past human activity is preserved. These sites range from ancient ruins to buildings still in use today. Studying these sites and their artifacts help us learn more about our history and the people who lived before us. Archaeologists divide the excavation site into smaller pieces called fields. Those fields are further divided into specific areas called squares, which are usually about 5 by 5 meters. This makes it easier for them to keep detailed notes about their discoveries. One of the walls of the square is called a bulk, which is left standing to show the different layers or stratigraphy. To date an artifact or a layer from a tell, archaeologists use a process called archaeological dating, either by looking at the kinds of pottery they find, using carbon-14 testing, or looking at people or dates mentioned in inscriptions. This helps them determine the historical period of what they found. Sometimes artifacts are found in situ, which means they are found exactly where they were originally left. These coins, for example, were once someone's treasure that they buried to keep safe. Thousands of years later, a teenager found them while excavating in Jerusalem. Can you imagine how cool that would be? Some other artifacts have inscriptions, which means they have writing on them. Inscriptions can be on anything from a monument to a simple piece of pottery used in daily life. What is an artifact? Well, an archaeological artifact is any object made, used, collected, or left behind by a human. They give us important clues to the world they lived in, what they ate, wore, and how their culture changed over time. So you can imagine that when artifacts are discovered, archaeologists make sure they are carefully recorded, studied, and preserved. One of the most common types of artifacts found at a tell is pieces of pottery called sherds. These sherds can be used for ceramic typology, which is a way to organize pottery and ceramics by their characteristics. Archaeologists use ceramic typology to date the different layers of a site. This section of time in history is called the historical period. It's a time period defined by historical events that you can identify at the tell. Let's explore some key discoveries that have illuminated our understanding of the Bible and ancient history. It's fascinating to learn that over 50 Israelite and non-Israelite biblical characters have been confirmed through archaeology. In 1868, the Mesha Stela, an impressive inscription on carved black rock, was discovered in Jordan. It's significant because it tells the story of Moab's victory over Israel in agreement with the biblical account. An inscription on the Merneptah Stela found in Egypt contains the earliest non-biblical mention of Israel. The Dead Sea Scrolls were accidentally discovered when shepherd boys were throwing rocks into caves and heard the sound of pottery breaking. These scrolls include nearly every book of the Old Testament and provide some of the oldest copies of biblical texts at over 2,000 years old. The Ketef Hinnom scrolls, tiny silver scrolls found in Jerusalem, contain the oldest known biblical text, a blessing from the book of Numbers, dated to nearly 600 years BCE. This is around the time the prophet Daniel was alive. So how exactly does archaeology help us understand the Bible? Well, unfortunately, not all archaeologists view the Bible with the same level of importance or reliability that we do. One view, known as biblical minimalism, is a trend in biblical scholarship that began in the 1990s. Minimalist scholars believe that the Bible cannot be considered reliable evidence for what had happened in ancient Israel. This view holds that those who wrote the Bible were not recording history as it happened, but instead were trying to legitimize their claim on the land and support their religion. The second view, known as biblical maximalism, is a fundamentalist position that holds that the Bible was dictated word by word from God. These Christians try to use archaeology to prove the Bible and have been disappointed many times for the lack of evidence of their historical reconstructions. Seventh-day Adventist archaeologists are different in the way they approach biblical archaeology. Adventists have distinguished themselves for their seriousness on the field with thorough and scientific methods.
Archaeology can be helpful, not necessarily in proving the Bible true. This doesn't mean that God exists, that He created the world, or that Moses received the Ten Commandments from God on Mount Sinai. Those, to me, still require faith. But it does show that a lot of the incidental statements that we find in the Bible are not warranted. The skepticism about them is not warranted. We should have a little bit more faith and confidence in what the ancient writers are saying.
They avoid claims that are not proven and wait for further serious research. Adventist archaeologists believe that archaeology illuminates the Bible. It doesn't have to prove it, as maximalists think. After all, the Bible is more than just a collection of historical arguments. Believing in the Bible is not only about history, it's about how God's Word can transform lives. In conclusion, every artifact, every dig brings us closer to understanding the past and the world of the Bible. As young archaeologists, your mission is to piece together the clues and solve the mysteries you encounter. Remember, every find is a piece of the puzzle. Now go forth and discover the secrets buried in the sands of time. The adventure awaits.